Let's talk to Ben Goessling from the Star Tribune out in Indianapolis for the scouting combine. Ben, it seems like it's less about looking at all these players running the 40 and more about getting the inside dirt on everything going on out there, right?
Yeah, that's 100% it, Mike. There's a lot of activity, as you can probably hear around me, but a lot of the activity that we are probably most interested in is what the Vikings are going to do in free agency. There's lots for them to get figured out between now and March 12th, and a lot of conversations this week about what's going to happen with Sam Darnold, what might happen with Byron Murphy, probably their top free agent other than Darnold, and then just a lot of discussion about they have a lot of things to do on the coaching staff yet. Kevin O'Connell's deal is done, but they need to figure out a few other things with the rest of that staff, extensions for the coordinators, figuring out what happens with Grant Udinski going to Jacksonville. So there's lots to determine for them, lots of business to happen probably in the next 6 to 8 weeks there for them.
That's a good point. I mean, you guys wrote earlier this week about Darnold and just the mystery about, we got the deadline coming up on Tuesday, if they're going to franchise him, stuff like that. Again, Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell saying all the same things. Basically, we've, optionality, all that good stuff.
Yes.
Like, do you get a sense for where this is headed or what the market might be for Sam Darnold?
Well, the conversation I've had on the tag idea this week, I think they're very interested in doing a tag and trade if they can. The operative phrase there is if they can, because this is more difficult than I think people realize. And a lot of my conversations this week in Indianapolis were about that. If they were to tag him, he has to sign the tag for him to be under contract with the team, which means they cannot trade him until he signs that tag. So he would have to say, I like my options. I like where I could go. And I am happy playing for this team on this tag, because all of that has to happen for the Vikings to make all of this work. So if that doesn't happen and you tag him, then you're paying him $41 million plus the dead money from last year's cap. So you're talking a cap number of around $46 million in addition to whatever reputation stuff or relationship stuff you have to sort out between him and the coaching staff and JJ McCarthy and the coaching staff. There's a lot that has to happen to make this work. So even talking to people around the league and in the organization, it's not an easy thing to pull off. It's part of the reason we haven't seen it done very much is the mechanics of it are tough to pull off. It's not something that they're going to stop looking at, but I think the actual logistics of getting this done are pretty complicated, which is why I'm not sure it's going to happen between now and Tuesday.
Well, and I mean, how much more would they realistically get in a tag and trade versus a end of the third round compensatory pick, which is what they probably would get if he left, in the 2026 draft is when that would come around. But I don't even know what the marketplace would be for a Sam Darnold trade.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to have somebody that doesn't want to get into a bidding war for him in free agency that says, let's make the trade now and we can avoid all of that. And then you sign him to a deal of your liking, but you have to have somebody that's interested enough in him to do that and say, we will give up probably a second or a third this year. I mean, the advantage of doing it is that you get to pick this year, not next year when you are not dealing with the same issues in terms of draft capital. So that would be the reason for the Vikings to want to do it, but you have to have somebody that likes him enough to say, this is our guy for the long term, because you'd probably try to sign him to a deal that's longer than just this year, especially if you're going to make that trade for him. So it only takes one. There are teams that need a quarterback. He's the best quarterback in the free agent market. But the tag and trade option, I think, takes a special level of belief in Sam Darnold and what he could be for a new team in the long term. So it's not impossible to do it. It just takes a lot of people to be motivated to reach that particular conclusion before Tuesday, which is coming up relatively quickly here. So there's a lot to figure out if they were going to try to do it.
Indeed. And I mean, let's face it too. If you're talking about this as them being interested in a tag and trade, are we coming closer to the conclusion that they are not going to then keep Sam Darnold under, certainly not under a tag, but that we're inching towards the conclusion that we all have kind of assumed in that he's playing somewhere else in 2025?
That seems a little more likely to me, because I think if he's going to sign a long-term deal, I don't think it's going to be here. I think they are still strong enough on JJ McCarthy and feeling good enough about his recovery from that knee surgery that there's a lot of reason, I think, to do it. And just to say this was the plan. He didn't have his rookie year, but he did get a lot of developmental work done, whether it was being in meetings or attending practices, still doing a lot of the same stuff he would be doing if he was a backup that wasn't playing. He didn't get the practice snaps, which is a blow. But during the season, if he was the second or third quarterback and he was healthy, he would not have gotten a ton of practice time anyway. It would have been the side work with their additional coaches, with Grant Udinski. He didn't have that, but did a lot of the VR stuff. They strapped the GoPro on Darnold's helmet. I think they feel like as much as you can get out of those things, they got a lot of benefit from those. And all of the time that he was in the classroom and in meetings, I think they feel pretty good about all of those things. So they wanted a cheap quarterback. They wanted a young quarterback to get that surplus of if you get high-level quarterback play from a guy on a cheap contract. I think in the end, it makes a lot of sense to say, let's stick to our plan and go play our guy. If they feel good about it, maybe you go get Daniel Jones on a cheap deal if he becomes this year's Sam Darnold. It'll depend a little bit on what his market looks like too. But I think it's a little more likely that it goes that way. It's a nice idea to be able to tag and trade Darnold, or maybe his market falls out to the point where they can get it back at $28 million a year or something like that. I'm sure they'd be interested in that, but that seems hard for me to believe. So if he gets to the market, I think he's going to sign a deal that they say, it was fun. We wish you the best of luck, but we're moving to our next option and moving to JJ McCarthy.
Some of this, too, is tied to the head coach who got a contract extension this offseason. You got McCarthy under contract through 2027 and really under team control through 2028 when you factor in the fifth-year option. Where do we stand with O'Connell's contract? What we know about that? Kwesi's contract extension possibility, the coordinators, everything like that.
Yeah, so I got quite a bit of information on that talking to people down here this week. My understanding from people I talked to, Kevin O'Connell's new deal runs through the 2029 season. So it's 4 years in addition to the 1 year he had left on his deal. Basically, he had his deal through 2025. They added 4 years to that to take him through 2029, which is a year past Justin Jefferson, a year past JJ McCarthy. I think that makes some sense so that he's not making those decisions in a contract year. The next step on that front now is to get deals done for their coordinators. Brian Flores and Wes Phillips are both up after 2025, and my understanding is they want to get new deals done for both of those guys this spring. I think one of the reasons O'Connell wanted the deal and one of the stipulations was I need to take care of my staff. I need to make sure that all of those people that have been pretty instrumental in the success over the last few years are taken care of in terms of deals that are competitive with the market and long-term contracts that make sure that they are set in Minnesota for a long time. I think Matt Daniels will probably end up in these contract discussions as well, but that is the next thing on the list from a coaching perspective. As far as Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, his contract is also up after 2025, and the Vikings continue to talk with him about a new deal. My sense of it is that there's not as big of a hurry on this, which seems odd to say given the fact that he's going into a contract year. But he has been, I think, pretty calm about the pace of it. I think it's a little bit of how he goes about it in free agency, where it's, I have a place I want to be. You have a place where you want to be. If we get this to the point where they match, great, let's get a deal done. If not, we can sit and wait and try to figure something out as we get closer to that deadline. I don't think that he is uncomfortable with the uncertainty at the moment. I don't think he's thinking about it a ton. It's not something he's going to bed every night fretting about, when is this deal going to get done? I think it will. I think a lot of it with him is, he's an economist. He's a guy that knows about leverage and deadlines in deals. And I think as you get closer to that point, he probably figures, I don't need to sacrifice the terms I want in a contract just to get it done a little sooner and have that peace of mind. So I think that's going into a lot of it. I think if we get closer to the draft and it's not done, I would have a little more concern about where is this going to go, because once the draft is done, your roster building is pretty much over for the year, give or take a few things that may come up with a trade or a contract or something like that. But the largest stage of your roster building is now done, which means he doesn't have any more to give them that they would say we're risking losing something here. I mean, if they felt good enough about his long-term potential, you'd still be worried about losing that. But if you get to that point after the draft, it's like, okay, now you can start to see a world where they start to look beyond one another. I don't think that will happen. I think there's still a lot of interest in getting this done. It's just there's not like a hard and fast deadline, maybe in the way that people on the outside have thought of this. That's been my sense of it, talking to people about it this week. And I just don't think he is as urgent about pushing this thing to a conclusion as people might want it to be, just because there's a lot of negotiation ramifications that come into it if you sign something just to have it done now.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it sounds like it's not so much that they're still evaluating him, or is it? Like,
I don't think it's that.
Okay. So it's more of a question of, do they get to the right term, everything like that? And
because I mean, if you think about, and everybody kind of talks about the drafts, and the drafts have not been good, but you're not going to have any more information about his drafts by the time you want to get this deal done than you have now. True. I mean, his 2025 draft will not deliver enough of a yield one way or the other for you to say, okay, this is our guy.
They don't have any picks.
Well, there's that too. But I mean, say they did. I mean, say they had 10 picks. If they were going to do something based on, we want to see what happens from this draft class, you're probably waiting until January to get that done, and his deal would expire, I think, right after the end of the season, probably right after the Super Bowl. So I don't think you're doing that. I think the information they're going to make a deal off of is what they have now, and they have been pretty consistent saying they want to get something done, and they were looking forward to those conversations. I think it will, whether it will be for the same number of years as Kevin O'Connell, and
that's the interesting thing.
I think that's interesting to see see where that goes and see what we find out. But I still do think it will get done. I just don't think that people are, trying to hammer this thing to a conclusion, maybe in a way that a lot of us would expect that they would want to do, or maybe that a lot of us on the outside want to see, just because we want to see it get done. And kind of, I think fans want to see it get done, that have it resolved, and kind of know where things are going to be.
Move on with our lives. Yeah.
Yes, there's a little bit of that.
Ben Goessling, a couple more things for you from Indianapolis. One, they do have to replace Grant Udinski, and that's an interesting, departure. Good for him. He moves up in his progression, and a guy that they thought highly of. Where do you see that process and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be. I think they're still trying to figure out a coaching hire there. I think they're still talking to people about that. I think they'll fill it, because a lot of their quarterback development process has been, we have all of these people in the building, from Kevin O'Connell to Wes Phillips. Right. Both of those guys played quarterback in college. Kevin O'Connell did it briefly in the NFL. You have Josh McCown, who played in the NFL for a long time, and Chris O'Hara is still in the building. So there's a good group there, but I think they want somebody to continue that individualized instruction, especially with JJ McCarthy, because Grant Udinski and JJ McCarthy were very close. JJ McCarthy saw Grant Udinski as one of the most important people to his development on this staff, which is why it's a loss. I mean, I think it's certainly a loss for their coaching staff. They weren't going to be able to keep all of these guys, but it is a big departure from that perspective. So trying to find somebody that can build that relationship and offer that level of individualized instruction to McCarthy is something they want to do, I think, but you have to find the right fit, and that may take a little bit of time, because finding somebody that did everything that Grant Udinski did in that role may not be the easiest commodity to replace.
One other quarterback of note before we go, Kirk Cousins. Didn't have the greatest end to 2024. Before, we forget, because of how it ended, Falcons were 6-3. Yeah. He was having a pretty typical Kirk season. I think like 17 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, passer rating over 100. Very good. Kirktober was good. Kirkvember, Kirksember, December Kirk. I don't know how we want to phrase it. It didn't go well. He said, "Hey, my shoulder and elbow were kind of hurt." Falcons are like, that's not really what we remember. I don't know if it was an injury or anything like that, but they're saying, "Hey, I think I saw Fontenot, their GM, the other day, saying, hey, our plan right now is to keep him." That sounds kind of expensive. What do you think is going to happen with Kirk Cousins in Atlanta?
Well, it was interesting that, you hear a lot about this week. They basically are on the hook for another $10 million if they keep him into the league year, because that guarantee, that option bonus in 2026 becomes guaranteed I think on the 5th day of the league year in 2025. Yeah. So he has another chance to make some money and get some money guaranteed. But everything else at this point is a sunk cost. Everything that they've spent, it's a bad mistake. It's a bad sunk cost, but you can't do anything to fix that at this point. So if they keep him, it may just be to say, this doesn't cost us that much more money than we've already sunk into this. Let's have him as a backup. The question I would have is, how is Kirk Cousins going to respond to that? Coming back with a no trade clause to back up the guy that you went to Atlanta not expecting the Falcons to draft. So how does all of that go? That I have a lot of interest in seeing what happens, because I know he would prefer, at least from what I heard this week, to get cut so that he can go pick his next destination and probably sign a Russell Wilson type deal where it's a league minimum, stick the Falcons with all of the guaranteed money. Cousins makes the same money either way because of that offset language in his deal. So I think if he could go find somewhere that he's going to have a chance to start, he's got that network of all of these coaches that he's played for. If there's somebody that says, we want to bring you in on the cheap 1-year deal, I think that would be his preference, but it's going to be determined by what the Falcons want to do. And there's probably going to be a little bit of a standoff here. He continues. I mean, you can't come to the combine without having Kirk Cousins intrigue, it seems like. So obviously it doesn't affect the Vikings at this point, doesn't affect them anymore, but still sort of interesting after we all watched him for 6 years and kind of seeing where this all shakes out after he left Minnesota for that deal. Very interesting subplots with Kirk Cousins down here this week.
Awesome. Ben Goessling, appreciate it. Speaking of subplots, try not to get yelled at a Starbucks in the process of all your reporting, and we'll talk to you soon.
I will try to avoid any coffee-related melees. Thanks, Mike.
All right. You bet. Thanks, Ben.